Can you all see that?
Yes.
So my presentation today is on how to print from Lightroom and using the hard proofing method. I'm also going to show you a little bit about how I choose my printing paper, which seems to be a question that I keep getting asked, but I never knew really how to explain it. So I'm going to give you some options of how to go about that. And then if we have time, I'm going to show you what to do with your prints if you want to try something new. So why print at home? Well, a lot of people would say that it's too expensive to print at home, and it might be. Depending on your budget, it might not be a good idea. I think for me, my photography really took off when I started printing at home. The reason being, in part, was just because I was able to actually touch what I was taking a picture of. So there's something that happens when you take a photograph, you develop it and you print it out and you can hold it in your hand. It helps you to be more conscious of why you're taking the picture or the photograph and then what you want to do with that photograph. So it really is important if a person's ready for that step. But you need to know your limitations because as we just saw, Jeff, who is brilliant, showed you some very complicated ways in which to print. And so your mind needs to be able to be flexible enough for that to occur. And so when I was learning to print, I don't know how many years ago, 4 maybe, I had to decide, how can I do this for me? And even though I remember Jeff sharing all of this stuff before, it didn't exactly, sometimes I just need the dummy approach. And so I went ahead and have been using hard proofing since then. So then you have to just, yes?
You're a turnkey.
Huh? I don't know, somebody say something? But anyway, so then you have to decide what printer to use. Well, the best thing to do is ask Jeff. No, just ask a friend and you'll find that there's people like our camera club group is a lot of the people actually have one of those Canon Pixma Pro 100s and they're just a great printer. So I went ahead and got one of those and I haven't been sorry since that happened. What I'm going to do here too today is just kind of help you to kind of think about the fact that when you're editing your photograph, you're actually going to be thinking about the fact that you're going to print this out. That's something you need to understand in that editing process, and then how to go about it in Lightroom. And then when you get that print, then what are you going to do with it? So you've all seen this image because y'all edited it, or some of you did. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into Lightroom. And if you've ever noticed, up in the right-hand corner, next to the Develop module is the Print module button. So up here on the right, you would choose the Print module button. But before you do that, you just want to make sure you go through and do all of your edits. This particular image I took through, several layers of edits, including some topaz and, all kinds of stuff. And I ended up with my image. So make sure that you know that, for the most part, it's sharpened, you have your noise reduction, you've cleaned the dust spots off and those kind of things. And so once you've done that, then you go ahead and you size your image. Now, Art was asking something about sizing images and ratios and so forth. I'm not going to get into that, but I am going to try and show you the difference between sizing your image and then printing your image. So when you choose the crop tool, which is right here, this little box, you would choose that. And underneath that is this aspect ratio area here. If you click on this little button over here on the right, or not the button, but the drop down, you'll have some um, options that pop up, and I'll show you in the next slide. So um, it'll show you things like a 2:3, 5:7, 8.5:11, 1:1, 4:5 ratio. And so you're going to need to know, if this image, what size, what ratio do I want it to print at? So when I was editing this particular image, I set it for a 3:2 aspect or a 2:3 aspect, same thing. And I take photographs in the 3:2 ratio. So they come out this size anyway. I may have straightened it, I may have cropped it a tiny bit, but for the most part, this was the ratio that I had. Now, when you do a 2:3 ratio, you can do the 4:6, 8:12, 10:15, 12:18. You can do a lot of different sizes of print with that ratio. So depending on your image, you would choose the ratio that best uses your image without taking pieces off of it that you actually want to have printed. So when you see your options in the drop-down box, when you go over here to the aspect ratio screen, you go ahead and you would say, well, I'm going to choose one of these. So like I did, I chose the 2:3. So I wouldn't go into custom sizing if you're new at this. I think it's just another area that you should wait for until you become much better at and more comfortable at printing. But if you're comfortable at printing, you can print pretty much any size of an image that you'd like according to the limitations of your printer. So let's get ready to print. So if we say, okay, I'm done with all that, I'm ready to print. So up here in the right-hand corner, you're click on the print module. Then in the left-hand corner on the bottom, it says page setup. So now that we know what size image we want to end up with, we click that and then go to the next page. And what happens is this page setup box will show up. So right here is the page setup box. It pops up here. And what you want to be able to do here is to make sure that you've chosen the printer that is your photo printer. Like I have two printers hooked up to my computer, so I don't want to use my regular printer. So I make sure it's always on the Canon Pro 100. And then the paper size is a drop-down type paper size choice. And in there, you have all this kind of these choices here. Well, I want to do a borderless 13:19. Now I chose that. I should have gone ahead and picked something like a 4:6, but I didn't. So I already started this whole thing before I realized I should have done that, but I didn't. And so I can print in my printer up to a 13:19 sheet of paper. So I'm going to choose the size of paper. And what I've chosen is I want to use the size of paper that's 13:19, but I also do not want to have a border. So then I would go ahead and choose that, which would be down here. And then I would say the orientation. Well, the orientation of my image is in a landscape mode. So my image being in a landscape mode is important to note. Now, if I had, let's say, a vertical image, like a tall building or something, I would choose the portrait mode. But I have a landscape photo here, and then I chose that. And then you want to go ahead and say, okay, and you go ahead and go on to your next slide. So what happens is on your print screen shows up. This is the whole screen in your print module. And it's like, well, why is my image so small? Well, the last time I printed, before I went into this particular image, I was printing something smaller. So, but it is showing the page size or the paper size that I've chosen, which is the 13 by 19. But within that is a cell. Now, the cell is actually your image, and your image fills the cell. I mean, that's the goal. So what you want to make sure is happening is that your image fills this cell. And the way that I do my kind of setup on the right is like this. So I blew this up a bit, and if you look at the top under the layout style, I choose the single image contact sheet. Now, if you want to get into other things, this isn't the time, but you know, some photographers do sample sheets for their clients, and they put, you know, 6 or 8 images on a sheet and other things. All I ever do is I just I just do one image at a time. So I choose a single image. Then on my image settings, I just put a check zoom to fill. And then I've got it all ready to go. And except, what's wrong with this? I mean, it's too tiny. What's going to happen? So what we want to go over here and notice here is this most important layout uh, drop down that you'll have in your print module. And right here in layout, you'll notice there's some margins, which is, in other words, your borders. What do you want your borders to be like in your image? Well, you needed to think about that back in the time when you were setting up your page, but that's what this would be for. The page grid, I just have one row because I have one image. And then the cell size is the cell size. So if you look at the lighthouse image over here on the left, you'll see the cell size in the upper left-hand corner. So this cell size and this pretty much over here on the right are the same. They use more decimals, but in comparison, it is the same. So what we want to do is, I'll go to the next one. We want to say, well, that's not going to work for me. So here's a look at what the layout settings are looking like at this time, but this won't work if I want to end up with a 13 by 19 borderless image. So you have to, you know, why wouldn't this work? Well, I know y'all know the answer, but it won't work because the cell is too small. So we'll go over here and we'll say, well, remember what size paper we're printing on? We're printing on a 13 by 19. And what'll happen if I keep the layout with these margins and this cell size? What's going to happen? I'm just going to print out a little 4 by 6 on this big piece of paper. That's not going to be very smart. And then did I set my page for a border? No, I didn't. So the margins are there and there's numbers here. I don't want any border. And so I tell myself, uh-oh. And so then now I fix it. So what I did here is I moved the margin sliders, these sliders here, move them all the way to the left, right, top, and bottom are all the way to the left. And so, and therefore has zeroed this out. That gives me the borderless image, and I have no margins or borders. Down in the cell size, height, and width, I've taken this and I've drug it all the way over to the right. So now I have as close to a 13 by 19 image as I can get. And you can double check that by looking up here on the left-hand corner of your image, and you can see that it is the same as this. So that's how you make sure you're going to get your cell to figure out your cell size to be as large as you want it to be. So we're almost ready to print a test print, but before we do that, while we're still in the print module, we have to go back down to the corner of the page and click on the print settings. So when we do that, this box comes up. And this box is basically is going to tell your printer in Lightroom where to print, and then how many prints you want, the type of paper, which tray to use, the print quality, and so forth. So this is an important box to kind of make sure that you have your paper profile chosen and all that other stuff. So if let's see, okay. Oh, then you go down to quality and media, and you drop that down. And in the quality and media options, you will get a list of all of these paper profiles that Jeff was talking about that you've added to your printer, which I'm not going to try and explain that because I could never do that. But anyway, let's see if it's in the next one. I think it is. Yes. So over here, I clicked on the quality and media, and drop down some paper profile options. Well, I tend to print with Red River paper, and my paper came with information on which profile to use with my printer for this particular paper that they sell. So I know that that's always going to be my choice, and I try to keep things simple. I don't have 5 kinds of paper. I just have one kind of paper, and that way I don't have to get too confused, because I do get confused with too much detail. So I chose that one, and then I come over here on the right, and you can see that I chose the photo paper plus semi-gloss, which is the recommended profile for the paper that I use. Then you're going to make sure that your paper source is a rear tray. Now, why do they call it a tray? For my printer, there's no tray, there's just a feed. And so I feed my paper into the place where it says I need to feed it. And that happens to be called the rear tray. And then the print quality usually shows up for me here, but I usually print in standard if this is what shows up. It seems to be perfectly fine, and the reading that I've done says it doesn't really make much difference. Now let's pretend that I was printing a black and white image. I would want to make sure that I chose down here at the bottom black and white photo. And so I'm not doing that, but that's just something to be aware of. But really, you just want to keep things simple. So then, so let's go ahead and print our image. So depending on your printer, you're going to do something like this. So you're going to turn your printer on and make sure it's ready to print. A lot of times, if you haven't had your printer on for a while, it's going to want to do its regular and all this stuff that makes you really impatient. And then it gets all ready to print. And you put your paper in according to the printer's directions. So my printer, which is the same as Jeff's and some other people's, has you feed your paper vertically. So even though I have a landscape image coming up here, the paper goes in a portrait mode, let's put it that way, a portrait mode. So what I did back when I set up my page was I actually put landscape as my option. Now, if you look at this tiny little box here, you see the little person in there, and he's sideways. And so that's because my paper is going to print in a portrait orientation. And so then my photo will come out in a landscape sideways way. You'll see. Anyway, but if you had like a portrait mode, you would pick portrait mode for your option. And so then Oh, yeah, so I was the reason I'm getting confused because I wrote down here that only Einstein and Jeff understand why this is. Like, I don't know. He's pretty s he I'm sure he knows why, but I don't know why you put it in that way to get it to come out that way. It's just one of those things I don't really care to know about. So here's my printer, and it's ready to print. And I have my 13 by 19 printing paper in there in the portrait mode, even though I'm having my landscape photograph come out. And now I go over here and I say, how do I make it print? Well, don't go up here to the right at the top and say print because that's not where you tell it to print. That's just saying you're in the print module. So come on down here at the bottom and you print from this button down here at the bottom. Right next to it says there's a another button that says printer button. Just ignore that because you already did all that work before. So what happens then is Lightroom sends the image to my printer and it starts printing. So when it's done, I look at it. So does it look the way I expect it to look? Are the colors correct? Is it light or dark enough? All the things that Jeff just went through as far as how to make that more, say, automatic through your, software and your, you know, all the options that you know how to use, which I don't. And so at this time, you would have, if you had done it, if I would have done this properly, I would have printed out like a 4 by 6 or a 5 by 7 or something, and I would have put a smaller piece of paper in my printer and I would have told it to print something. But what's happened with me over time, and I do quite a bit of printing, and over time, I have just learned to know my monitor. I know my monitor, it's calibrated, I know my printer, I know what I see, and when I print it out, it comes out almost always pretty much just the way I expected it to. There's a few things that happen at times which I do test prints for, and that's what you should do until you get more familiar with how everything works. But it's with when I'm doing really vibrant colors. And that way I always do test prints with really vibrant colors because those are the ones that tend to get a little wacky. So, um, so let's say, oh boy, okay, I'm happy with my outcome. So I went ahead and I printed out this big 13 by 19 borderless image, and here it is. So I can actually hold that, or I can put it in a frame, or I could do something if I wanted to, but I just basically did this for you guys. But I did want to print this out because I wanted to see what it looks like. So if I decided to go and get a metal print of this, I can pretty much uh, know that as a large image, or if I wanted to make a canvas print at a, MPix or wherever, I can tell that, a larger print is going to work for me. So that's pretty much it for that piece. Let's see, 411. I think I can have enough time.